Gilgit-Baltistan is home to some of the world's tallest and most majestic mountains. With incredible glaciers, green meadows, remote valleys, and stunning lakes, this region of northern Pakistan is without a doubt one of the world's best mountain destinations. In this video, I'm going to take you to a place that lies at the heart of the Karakoram and the Himalaya, a place called Fairy Meadows, which is very remote and difficult to access, but it's just one of those places that you have to visit if you're traveling to Pakistan. If you're new here, hi, my name is Laura and I've been traveling all over the world for the past few years. I share lots of travel vlogs, hidden gems, and travel info on this channel, so make sure you subscribe if you want more of that. But for now, let's go back into the video. The journey to get to Fairy Meadows is a very interesting one because first you have to get on a jeep that will take you to one of the most dangerous roads in the world. Fairy Meadows is incredibly remote and very difficult to access, so only jeeps can go on this road, and this is the jeep that we had. It definitely did not inspire trust. We had to climb into the windows to get into the jeep. It did not have back doors and it was very, very wobbly. This road was not paved at all. It was very rocky and it had a huge cliff right next to it. So it was definitely scary. But if there's one thing that I've learned on the roads of Pakistan is that if you leave your mind blank, you can do anything and go on any road and not feel scared. So that's exactly what I did here. If you leave your mind blank, you'll be fine, you'll be okay. And there comes a point where even the jeep cannot go further just because of how rugged the terrain is and how narrow the trail is. And once you reach that point, you're left with two options. So option number one is hiking, which is what most people will do. And the hike itself isn't too long, but I will say it is a pretty difficult hike. So all of the information that I found on YouTube and online before going on this hike said that it was a pretty easy, beginner-friendly hike. And to be completely honest, I really disagree. I don't think this is easy or beginner-friendly at all. Everyone that I talked to that did the hike seemed to confirm this, from tour guides to other tourists who struggled on it. The terrain is quite rocky and the trail is very narrow, and there is quite a steep uphill. It is very uphill, and especially when you consider the altitude during this hike, it is definitely not easy. So the hike starts at maybe 2,800 meters above sea level, and Fairy Meadows, the top, is at 3,200 meters above sea level approximately. And even though it doesn't seem like much, if you're not used to these kinds of altitudes, it can be a real struggle. Personally, the altitude was a bit of a problem for me. So prior to this trip, the highest that I had ever been was 2,700 meters above sea level, and I was totally fine at that altitude, but I realized during this trip to Pakistan that anytime that I approached 3,000 meters above sea level, I would start to struggle. So going on flat ground or walking downhill was totally fine, but any time that you made me walk the slightest uphill, I would be out of breath within like 10 steps. It was honestly humbling and pretty humiliating, to be completely honest. Besides being out of breath, I completely lost my balance, so it's a very difficult sensation to explain because I didn't exactly feel dizzy, but I felt like if you touched me on the shoulder, you would knock me down, like I would fall down. So it was a little bit unpleasant, and I also had a slight headache at times, particularly when I got over 3,500 meters. I did try using altitude sickness medication, but to be completely honest, it did absolutely nothing to me. It had zero effect on me whatsoever, so I stopped taking it after my second day in Fairy Meadows. So with all things considered, I chose not to hike up to Fairy Meadows, and I chose option number two, which is to take a horse. So I did this partially because of my struggles with altitude, partially because I'm not a very experienced hiker. I'm very much a beginner hiker, but also because I am a very experienced horse rider. I actually own a horse in my home country in Spain. His name is Indalo and he's the cutest guy ever. I absolutely adore him, but I chose to rent a horse for this hike. His name was Tiger. He's this horse right here, and I really enjoyed discussing horses with his owner, people around here. It was really fun just comparing the different ways of riding in Spain and in Europe in general versus in Pakistan. So some of the differences that I noted is that the horses in Fairy Meadows, they're very much bred for polo and similar sports, so they're smaller horses, And one of the guys here told me that, bigger horses can't really thrive in Fairy Meadows just because of the lack of pastures. So big horses just don't survive there. So the horses in Fairy Meadows are much smaller than the ones that you might find in other countries, or for example, than the ones that I found in Lahore in a different part of Pakistan. Horses here are also not trained to respond to the legs. So in Spain, where I ride, when you want a horse to move forward, you press him with your legs, with your calves. But that doesn't really work here. Horses are just not trained like that in this part of Pakistan. Instead, they respond to the voice and to the whip. And when it comes to the voice, we also use the voice in Europe. And when we want a horse to go forward, we go like this. But in Pakistan, they say choo. Choo, like that's the way that they make horses go forward. So I thought that was super interesting. There were also differences when it came to the saddle. The saddle is definitely different from anything that I've ever seen before. There's a blanket thrown over the saddle, which I thought was interesting, and the girth is pretty thin as well. And also in Europe, we're taught to get on and off the horse always on the same side. So we always mount and dismount the horse on the left side of the horse. But I noticed that in Pakistan, it doesn't really matter which side you mount or dismount off of. So at first they told me to mount on the right side, which I honestly struggled with because, I've been riding for like 15 or 16 years at this point, and I have never once gotten on a horse on the right side. So my brain just could not compute. It was honestly such a struggle. Other than that, I felt pretty good about riding the horses. They were allowed to have breaks, they drank plenty of water on the hike, and once they get to Fairy Meadows, they roam free and have a bunch of pasture to themselves. So I feel like the horses are pretty well taken care of, which was nice to see, because often when you ride horses for tourism, you will see that they lack a lot of nutrition or they're just not well taken care of, but that is definitely not the case in Fairy Meadows in my opinion. So if you feel like you might struggle on the hike, I definitely recommend that you consider riding a horse, because even though I'm an experienced horse rider and this was definitely much easier for me than walking, I also think it's much easier for people who are not experienced horse riders. So I definitely recommend that you consider this, or that you consider getting a horse halfway up. The ride was also so beautiful. The views here are stunning, and especially once we started getting close to Fairy Meadows, we were able to see Nanga Parbat, which is the 9th highest mountain in the world at 8,125 meters, I believe. And the views of the mountain are just stunning. The views only got better once we got to Fairy Meadows itself, and we stayed at a place called the Raikot Sarai Hotel, and just look at the views we had from this place. So this is the view from our front porch at Raikot Sarai. It is very, very impressive. That over there is Nanga Parbat, which is one of the highest mountains in the world. It's the 8th highest mountain in the world, and yes, the view is absolutely lovely. And if you go in here, this is our room. So it's super, super cozy. It's a nice mountain hut here in Fairy Meadows. This hotel is Raikot Sarai. There's also a window where you can see Nanga Parbat over there. And if you go this way, this is the bathroom. So it's pretty nice considering how remote this place is, because Fairy Meadows, it's very, very remote. And this is a very nice, small but cozy mountain hut, which is exactly what I was looking for. Just made it to Fairy Meadows, and the view here is spectacular. It is truly, truly amazing. And I'm really, really glad that we got the horses, because the hike is not easy. So everywhere that I looked online and everyone that I asked said that it was easy, but I really disagree, if I'm honest. There's a pretty serious uphill. The altitude here is no joke. This place is at 3,000 meters, and I definitely felt the altitude when I walked. I was so out of breath when I walked. Like, even the tiniest distance, the tiniest uphill, just made my breath go away, literally. So I don't think this is an easy hike at all. The trail is quite thin at times and quite rocky. So yeah, I don't think this is beginner friendly, and I'm not a very experienced hiker. I would definitely consider myself a beginner hiker, but I'm a very experienced rider, so I'm very, very glad that I got the horses. The only problem I have is that this morning I was packing my bag for my 2 nights here because I didn't take my entire suitcase. I just packed a bag and took it with me. And I was so busy doing that and thinking about that I forgot to brush my hair, and I forgot my hairbrush. So now I don't have a hairbrush for 2 days. So yeah, my hair will be messy. I'm gonna try to braid it, but I'm not sure if I will be able to because I've got a few knots in here. But yeah, I'm not complaining. This place is amazing. It's a really small problem to have, and honestly, these things matter very, very little when you're traveling, so it's all fine. It's a small problem to have. After we got to Fairy Meadows and we checked out our hotel, we decided to see if we could find one lake where you can see a reflection of Nanga Parbat, and we found it. It was so beautiful. And this is a natural lake, by the way. There's a stream that flows into it, so the lake is not artificial, it is not Photoshop, and it is just so beautiful. The owner of the Raikot sarai also took us to this little place that he knew, which is kind of away from the touristy area and is more in the local area where the locals keep the cattle and plant some potatoes and just work in, in this place. And he showed us these rocks that we could get onto and see this view of the mountain, this view of Nanga Parbat with all the trees. And in the opposite direction, you could also see as far away as the Rakaposhi, which is another very important peak here in Gilgit-Baltistan. I think it's the world's 27th highest. It's definitely over 7,000 meters, but not over 8,000. And there's just a magic to Fairy Meadows because it is so authentic. Tourism hasn't changed this place at all. Tourism and locals really thrive together, and this place has definitely not lost its local authenticity because even though there is tourism in Fairy Meadows and there are hotels, it is definitely not crowded, and because it is not a very accessible place, you have to hike or get a horse to get here, and you also have to go on that dangerous road. There's people who definitely skip over it, so it's definitely not crowded, local life still thrives, and I think that is just so magical and so beautiful. There's horses and cows just roaming around, grazing, drinking from the stream, people herding their cattle and their goats, children playing, locals enjoying, and tourists enjoying the views of Nanga Parbat and just exploring the place. And it's just so heartwarming. It's such a nice place to be. We ended up having dinner at the Raikot sarai, so this is what we had. It's basically chicken and rice with a sauce. I don't know what it's called, but it was so good. And the next morning we woke up early to try to catch sunrise and Nanga Parbat. So this is the view that we got from our balcony in our little cabin. The mountain was clear, it was so beautiful. And that day we decided to go closer to the mountain. So there is a hike that starts from Fairy Meadows that goes through Beyal camp to a place called Viewpoint 1. This is a much easier hike to get to Fairy Meadows, so this one is 40 minutes to an hour, and there is a slight uphill on the way to Viewpoint 1, but it's not as drastic as the uphill that you have to get to Fairy Meadows in the first place. Still, if you're struggling with the altitude like me, I still recommend that you take a horse because up there in Viewpoint 1, it's 3,600 meters above sea level, so I still recommend a horse. And also, why walk when there's horses available, especially if you're like me and you enjoy horses? You always pick the horse. There's actually an Arabic saying that says something like, the winds of heaven are the winds that blow through a horse's ears, and I cannot agree more with that. There are two passions that I have in life, which is horses and travel, and what better thing than to combine them both into one? I will say, I think this hike is much more beautiful than the one to get to Fairy Meadows as well. It's much greener, there's lots more forest, the views of Nanga Parbat are better in my opinion, and the stop at Beyal camp is so nice. Beyal camp is a really beautiful place. I really liked it here. We actually had lunch in Beyal camp on our way back from Viewpoint 1 back to Fairy Meadows, and it was a really nice lunch. It's such a nice place. And once you get to Viewpoint 1, the views are just spectacular. You get this insane view of Nanga Parbat just much closer, and you also get to see the Raikot glacier close up. And there's just something about seeing a glacier so close, which is so fascinating. Seeing all of the little details of the ice and of the glacier itself is just so interesting and spectacular. So this is where my time in Fairy Meadows comes to an end. After this, we went back down to Fairy Meadows, we enjoyed more views of Nanga Parbat, and the following day we went back down with the horses all the way to where we got the jeeps, and then back down one of the most dangerous roads in the world to the valley down below. If you enjoyed watching this video, or if you found it useful if you ever want to travel to Fairy Meadows yourself, make sure you leave a like, a comment, and make sure you subscribe. It helps me so much if you do that. And stay tuned for more videos about Pakistan. I have so many videos still coming, and the next one is about a super interesting place called Hunza, which has so much history from the Silk Road, but is also incredibly beautiful and has stunning nature and stunning mountains, some of the highest in the world as well. So make sure you subscribe and you stay tuned for that.